Adding gradients to strokes inside of Illustrator has traditionally been somewhat of a challenge because in older versions of Illustrator, it was completely impossible. But in recent versions of Illustrator, they've actually added the ability to create gradient strokes, and they've added a few different controls that make it even easier to create really complex gradients even inside of a stroked object. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. First things first, let's select the clock face that's on screen. This is actually just one circle, and it has a very large red stroke, a 30-point red stroke applied to it. And what we want to do is give this a little bit of depth by creating a gradient across the stroke so that it's got a little bit of a darkening effect all the way around the edges. In order to do this, I'm going to bring up the stroke panel, and that's over here inside of the panels. Let's open that up, and we'll just drag it out onto screen. And we'll collapse this up. We'll click on this and choose Show Options. And once we have that open, you will see that you actually have all of these controls available to you in here. Now, you want to make sure that this is set to the outside, and it is, and 30 points looks good. So we'll keep that out there. We're also going to open up the gradient panel, and let's take that out, and let's just dock that to the bottom of the stroke panel. Then we'll close that up. Collapse the stroke panel for just a second. Go ahead and double-click on the word stroke, and that should collapse it up, making it a little bit easier to see the gradient panel. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click right here on the gradient, assuming, of course, that you have the stroke targeted over here in this panel. So make sure that you have the stroke as the active thing that you're working on. Then let's click on the gradient. You can see that it adds the gradient to that. And once you add the gradient to that, the stroke options will appear. So you have the option of applying the gradient within the stroke, which is what we're doing here. So you can see that it flows from white to black across there. You can do this along the stroke. And in this case, that's grayed out. It won't let me do anything. And also apply the gradient across the stroke. Both of those unable to be achieved. It's because we do not have the stroke applied the correct way. If I apply it to the center of the object, you can see that it then has the ability to do that. You have to make sure the stroke is being applied in the correct way. So you have to align the stroke to the center of the path in order to make this work initially. So let's go ahead and explore the apply gradient across the stroke. That's the one that I really want to focus on here because that allows me to apply the gradient from the outside of the shape inward. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the gradient stops down here to make this look as if the outer ring of this clock is three-dimensional. So let's open up the swatches panel here, and inside of the swatches panel I'm going to show you a little shortcut for adding colors to gradient stops. So for instance, I want the inner part of this, the black part of this, which is right here, I want that to be sort of a lighter red. So let's go ahead and click this color, drag it down, and let's drop it right on top of that color stop. When I do, it changes the color. Now let's grab this darker red right next to it, click, drag that down, and apply it to that part of the color stops. Now you can see it is sort of dark around the outside, lighter around the middle. Not quite dark enough for me though, so here's what I'm going to do. Let's collapse this up. And let's double click right here on this gradient slider. That's going to open that up, and I'm just going to increase the black amount quite a bit. And when I do that, you're going to see that it changes the gradient, but it doesn't change the clock because I didn't have it selected. Make sure you have the object selected. Then double click and change the gradient. There we go. So we can kind of make it look as if it were three-dimensional. Then we'll click away from it. Now, in this case, I think I might actually have to reverse the gradient in order to make this look the way I really want it to. So let's reverse the gradient here. Let's see what that looks like. Something kind of like that. That doesn't look bad. The only thing I might do is add another gradient stop to the outside of it. So let's move this in, and let's add another stop here. And actually, let's just copy the other stop. So let's remove that one. Optional, drag that over. Something like that. And remember, again, that is not getting anything changed because we don't have the object selected. So let's reverse these. Okay. And then let's move this guy to the middle. Optional, I'll drag that over. There we go. There. Now that looks a lot better. Might even darken the middle now because it looks a little too light. So let's just darken that up just a little bit. There we go. And there is our new three-dimensional clock face that is done completely with a stroke, and that is completely customizable as well. So now in the stroke panel I can decrease the stroke around the outside or increase the stroke around the outside, making that ring around the outside of the clock bigger or smaller based on my needs or the client's needs or whoever is actually reviewing this. So creating gradient strokes, like I said, traditionally has been somewhat of a pain in Illustrator, but in the last few versions, it's got tremendously more potential, and I'm very excited about the advancements they continue to make in here. So as you are applying gradients to different things in Illustrator, make sure to try it out on a stroked object and see if you can't sort of create more depth and texture by using this feature. Adding gradients to strokes inside of Illustrator has traditionally been somewhat of a challenge because in older versions of Illustrator, it was completely impossible. But in recent versions of Illustrator, they've actually added the ability to create gradient strokes, and they've added a few different controls that make it even easier to create really complex gradients, even